All right, good morning, guys. Welcome to the Texas ACSM, the first of our fall 2020 virtual lecture series. So my name is Dustin Jobert. I serve as the Continuing Education Director for Texas ACSM, which usually means I'm a travel agent that helps organize the speaker stops across the state. But being in this virtual format, I'm going to be kind of our host and moderator today. So I've got the pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Mark Faries. Dr. Faries has a unique educational background in both exercise physiology and exercise psychology, as well as practical work experience in the fitness industry, academic research, and extension public health. Academically, he's got a BS in kinesiology from Texas A&M, an MS in ex-phys from Baylor, and a PhD in behavioral health from UT Austin. He's currently an associate professor in behavioral medicine and an extension specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. His academic research is focused on the difficulties people have with behavior change. Additionally, he has served on the board of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and is the founder of fitnesspudding.com, a site dedicated to debunking health and fitness myths, which really ties in directly to his talk for us today, looking at how we can use science to debunk myths. So before passing it off to Dr. Faries, one final note from me: you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions for Dr. Faries at the end of the talk. As long as the questions seem appropriate and free of any kind of Zoom bombing behaviors, you should be able to see the questions that others have asked, and you can even upvote the ones that you would prefer to have answered. If we have any issues there, I'll make the questions private, but you can still submit them so that we can field those at the end of the talk. All right, so without further ado, we'll hand it over to Dr. Faries.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Lim. Thank you, the board. I'm really honored to be here and to be the guinea pig for the first virtual fall lecture series. To be honest, I feel like I've sort of made it because I have been asked to do this because TAXM has been such a strong, important, significant part of my life from when I was a student all the way through faculty. And so extremely honored to be here, in particular to talk about this topic that's true and dear to my heart. I'll tell a little bit of the background as we go along of how I got to this point, but largely it reflects on how I was perpetuating myths, and I just didn't know it when I was younger. I didn't know how to utilize research and evidence to come to a conclusion. I was hearing some people were saying, this is the way you do exercise, and others were saying, this is the way. This is the way you should eat. No, this is the way you should eat. And what I ended up finding, especially when I started transitioning from exercise physiology to psychology, is I started seeing that these myths, fallacious thinking, so to speak, began to impact people's behavior, their beliefs in themselves, their belief in expectations of outcomes. I've tried every diet, so healthy eating doesn't work for me. I tried the Thigh Master, but you know what? Exercise doesn't work for me. And so I became fascinated not only in the physiological aspects, but the psychological aspects. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to start with a little quiz. And in particular, I would like to consider I'm going to give you a list of diets. And I want you to tell me if those are, or you don't have to, I guess, tell me in this setting, but think in your mind, if you think that this diet is a fact, actually that it does exist in this case, or it's foolery. In other words, I've made it up. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a few descriptions. Number one, this diet allows you to eat your favorite foods and lose weight by simply sprinkling them with special crystals. Is that a real diet, fact, or is that one that I made up, foolery? That is a fact. If you've heard of Sensa, it was more popular in the past, but we have seen this before and we see iterations of this today. Number two, this diet involves replacing 1 to 3 meals per day with baby food. Is that fact or foolery? Yep, that one's fact too. That's a real diet that does exist if you're into that sort of thing. Number three, this diet prescribes ongoing injections derived from either pregnant bovine or pregnant human urine. Fact or foolery? That is also fact, the HCG diet. All right, last one. This diet involves sewing a mesh patch into the top of the tongue, making eating solid food extremely painful, thus eating less. fact or foolery, you're seeing the trend. That is a fact that is called the tongue patch diet. If you notice in that picture, if you can see that, when they sew the mesh patch into the tongue, they leave the suture sticking up, so it makes it even more painful when any sort of solid or semi-solid food passes over that. They end up putting you on a liquid diet, of course, a very low calorie liquid diet, and people lose weight. And this is a clear behaviorist determinant to eating solid food. So we live in a world where myths exist. We live in a world where misconceptions exist. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I believe that too many professionals perpetuate these myths. And I'm the first to raise my hand to admit that I've done that before. And I really, really try hard now not to do it. And I hope I don't do it in the future. So when we talk about this world of myths and fallacy, it's good to separate the two definitions. So a fallacy is a misconception due to incorrect reasoning. The key here is the incorrect reasoning. This is where I found as a student and as I've progressed in my career, it was just, I wasn't good at this, right? And we're going to talk about some of that this morning of ways that I go about trying to get better and better to make sure that my reasoning is more correct than incorrect. The myth is a widely held but false belief or idea, a misrepresentation of the truth. The key here is misrepresentation. Now, in the worlds that we live in, especially with exercise and fitness and diet, myths exist on purpose. In other words, some people purposely misrepresent the truth. And other times it's not a purposeful act, it's just something that occurs. But again, knowing the evidence and being able to go through a process that I'm going to teach you this morning, the one that I use, hopefully you have a skill set to be able to recognize fallacy and to recognize myths and handle those accordingly. But if we get, before we get there, think about someone who would want to go to Google, for example, and search HCG diet. They would search and they would go through, and if they made it to the second page, the link number 17 from Harvard Health, that would be the first kind of academic related, government related website. Not that the other sites weren't good, not that the other sites were not experts, but when individuals don't necessarily know to go look for a particular expert at this website, they may want to focus in on the governmental websites or not, the educational academic websites or not. If they choose one of the other ones, then what is the risk for them, right? Do they get an expert or do they not? The reason I chose this one as well, because when you click on it, it brings you to this website, and it was actually published in May of 2010. And an MD, a doctor, was asked about the HCG diet. And I'd like to share to you what he said. His review found in 2010 that the HCG diet, first off, is a weight loss plan that combines daily injections of HCG with severe calorie restriction, only about 500 calories per day. I believe that's been increased to 750 calories per day, which is still considered a very low calorie diet, ideally medically supervised. The HCG diet has been studied in randomized trials that have included control groups receiving a placebo, which is most likely saline, injection instead of the HCG. So they thought they were getting HCG injections, but they were actually getting saline. In almost every case, researchers found that any weight loss was entirely due to the low or very low calorie diet. A meta-analysis, a study that applied statistical lens to a bunch of articles as a review article of 24 studies published way back in '95, many of you were probably not even born, concluded that there was no scientific evidence that HCG causes weight loss, redistributes fat, reduces hunger, or creates a feeling of well-being. The FDA has stated that HCG is of no benefit in the treatment of obesity. Now, that was a while back. Things could have changed and research could have improved this and changed our perspective. But I liked how this doctor made the approach from an evidence base. I liked how he described what it was, put everybody on the same level. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about HCG diet. This is what the description is. Went into the studies, went into the totality, as we'll see in a moment, of the research, and drew a solid conclusion, at least at that time, I assume he would then be willing and open to if any research changed that. This gets us in the realm of evidence-based practice. I should be an evidence-based practitioner. I believe that you should be as well, that we have our own individual experience and knowledge that adds to that. We have our client or our patient values that add to this. And then a focus today is the best external evidence. Now, we can go to other sites, right? We can go to CDC, NIH, FDA, USDA, and so on. We can even visit the sites a little more in depth. We can go to ACSM. We can go to, this is the NIH, National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. As you see, they have some evidence-based review, Cochrane reviews you might be familiar with, that sort of do the dirty work for us. You can also visit sort of these intermediate type sites. I already mentioned Harvard Health and Harvard Medical School. Berkeley Wellness has a really stellar looking website. And if you're considering brewing kombucha, they got some stuff on that as well. However, when I think about this effort, and these are great, but the more I talk to professionals and the more I think of myself and the more I'm asked to go train and educate physicians, healthcare providers, personal trainers, and graduate students, undergraduates kind of coming up in this world of how do we combat these myths, I can't help but think that we might define these as reputable sources, but I can't help but think that you are the reputable source. I should be that reputable source. In other words, having a good reputation. Look at the synonyms: well thought of, well respected, credible, established, trusted, trustworthy, principled, and virtuous. One thing that I've benefited from Taxum over all these years is the network, the colleagues, and the friends that I've met who I would call reputable. I now exist in a world here at Texas A&M, where, as Dustin mentioned, I do exist as an associate professor in behavioral medicine for the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and adjunct faculty of the School of Public Health and the College of Medicine. All of that is around trying to train people to be reputable sources. And one thing that intrigues me about extension work that I do out into the communities, all 254 counties across the state, is the purpose since its inception has been to change human behavior by teaching people how to apply the results of what? Scientific research. So that puts the ball in our court, right? In my court, in your court, of how do we go find the research and apply it in an effective way, particularly related to myths, which we'll focus on today. You can go stay up to date with journals. Some of you might be a part of newsletters where they send out. I know there's an obesity and energetics newsletter that goes out, and students and other faculty find studies and it comes in my email box. I don't have to search for it. I stay connected with numerous journals that send me research as it comes out, as new issues come out. So that allows me to stay on top. Now I could go to Google Scholar, if you're familiar with Google Scholar, and type in fat loss, for example. And I did this recently where I was looking at, particularly as you see highlighted, the correlation of sweat to fat loss, because I was asked a question about, hey, when I exercise and I sweat, am I losing fat out of that sweat? And I did a search for that. And in short, what I found was actually a study, I think it's either in the late 60s, early 70s. They brought men into the lab, they wrapped them in some saran wrap, or at least a section of their back. They exercised in high heat, high humidity. They sweat under that saran wrap. They pulled it off, scraped the fat off their hairy backs, did some analysis, and found that there was barely trace amounts of any free fatty acids within that sweat. So in other words, we can conclude with pretty strong certainty that you're not going to be sweating a bunch of fat out, which could challenge some of the products out there that may claim those things. But again, it's trying to ground it in the research. When you use Google Scholar, if you're not aware of this, it's a strong resource for you to have. It will find everything. In this search, as you see, it found 3,390,000 results in 0.09 seconds, because Google likes to brag at how fast it found those things. This first one, for example, high intensity intermittent exercise and fat loss. Let's say you're curious about that. Google Scholar is pretty cool, because if there's a PDF that exists, it will likely find it and put it over there to the right. I am logged in in this example, through the Texas A&M library. And so I can access really any journal, either directly through the library or do an interlibrary loan. And as a part of an academic institution, you would have that capacity as well. It has all these other features: starring and saving, organizing. You can find related articles. You can also change it up by the year. I highly recommend, when you do topics, that you start at most recent and work backwards with Google. It does try to find the best fit. You can also use the same Google tricks that you would use for any search. You can do the quotes around fat loss, for example. You can add and do and or. You can put all in title colon and only look for words that are in the title. And you can search those things, and they can help you quite a bit in doing the searches. Of course, PubMed.gov. With NIH, it has some really great advanced features. It has some great features if you want to focus in on review articles and meta-analyses or clinical trials, human, animal only, and those sort of things. So when I first started getting intrigued with this, I was a grad student and getting my master's, and the short of the story was I was working across 2 different labs that day. I was in the ESNL at Baylor, and we were doing some early morning fitness testing. And I found a magazine as we were waiting on one of the participants to come in, and it was looking at a plank, a core exercise, as you might be familiar, bows and toes, some call it. And it's a core strengthening exercise. So I was like, okay, whatever. And I was sort of fascinated with core training, always had been. My years in the fitness industry, I was highly intrigued with functional training, and kind of had a physical therapy vibe to that knowledge. But later that afternoon, I was in the biochemistry lab, and I was helping out, trying to do some things. We were waiting on an assay to run, and I pulled up another magazine, another fitness magazine. And again, it had the plank, but instead of core strengthening exercise, it said core stability exercise. And I was like, you can't be both, right? You're either training strength or you're training stability. And when they say strength, what are they talking about? When they're saying stability, what are they talking about? Probably not stability of the muscle, probably stability of the spine. So am I strengthening spine? Am I strengthening muscle? And it just bothered me. I started looking into it, and I ended up writing a review article called Core Training Stabilizing the Confusion. And you can go find that. I was a master's student. I looked at well over 150 articles. I know I cited over 100, and I got wonderful practice at finding research, reading it, understanding it, assimilating it, to come to some conclusions that I could educate the practitioners. And that's where I first, I knew I liked educating, I knew I liked teaching, but that was an experience that really got me, I think was early stage of me wanting to train professionals, which I do a lot more now in my career. That led to a few different things. It led to me becoming more and more interested in myths, and becoming more interested in fallacy, and becoming more interested in how, again, I said earlier, how it affected behavior. So I started a website, as Dustin mentioned, called fitnesspudding.com. This is a public resource. I do this as a hobby, and I've been doing it for many years now. You see, this is a screenshot from the homepage from a bit back, but I just did my first Fitness Pudding podcast, and I'm not that great at it. However, Dr. Bill Campbell, who is also a TACSM alum, was gracious enough from University of South Florida to chime in. He is a metabolism expert, and so I was able to pick his brain about some metabolism myths, and it's extremely fascinating, and he is quite wonderful and brilliant, so I recommend going to check that out. The goal, however, was to start using evidence to, at first it was more like, I'll be honest, it was more like, I'm going to bust these myths, right? I'm going to debunk them. But I started finding one that I had a lot of bias going into things. So I had to put that in check. I started learning too that, well, the data kind of supports something different. The data seems to support this, and I thought it was this. And how comfortable was I in changing my perspective and changing my attitude based on the evidence? So again, I found myself getting stronger and stronger. I also found myself getting more and more frustrated, thinking back on my own life and how many myths I was perpetuating because I didn't ground my opinions. I didn't ground my thoughts. I didn't ground what I was trying to say in the science. Not that opinions are bad, but being able to separate the evidence-based information from the opinionated information so that people know the difference, I think, is extremely important. I also became fascinated in the fact that professionals and practitioners continue to perpetuate these myths today. So I developed a system over the years, and that's what I'm going to teach you very, very quickly because of our limited time. And I'm going to fly through this to kind of show you what we do. I actually teach a class on this. I taught one at SFA. Dr. Eric Jones now has taken that over. At Stephen F. Austin, I now teach it here in the School of Public Health at Texas A&M. And the idea is to teach students how to do that. And the start of all of this list is just getting a basic description of what is the claim, what is the myth, where did it come from, what is the history. Some common sites that we see, our sources, so to speak, is of course media and celebrities, as you see with the waist trainer. What we do find, I find at least a lot, is that these things aren't necessarily new. They are sort of the whole what goes around comes around idea. So in this case, we had corsets in the 18th century. And then in the early 1900s, there was a fascinating magazine called Physical Culture, where it would have these ads. Dr. Walter had a lot of ads, hand-drawn, of weight loss and things like that. But he talks about these rubber garments. You notice that she has the corset style rubber garment, but also under her chin. And they were medicated with something. For chin only, you could get a $2 try at this, guaranteed money back. It has rheumatism as well, but they talked about reducing your flesh. That was the way they talked about that. I don't know if we could bring that back or not. Oddly enough, and coincidentally enough, perhaps ironically, research can be a source of this as well. Not that researchers are all out there trying to create myths, but it's more on the interpretation of that. And that's why we got to be really good at doing this and garner a skill set to where we can find a study and we can read it and assimilate it to the condition. This one is an interesting one on a satire, and particularly related to appetite suppressant lollipops that was sent my way based on something that Kim K had posted related to them. And so where does this come from? And just kind of get a sense of what does it mean? Well, I found that, that the satire can come from these stigma of the flower. If you crush it, that's where you get, and you can put that into pill form. Apparently you can put it into lollipops and other things, and that could have some impact on satiety, maybe weight control. Going back to that original study, what they ended up doing was they had two groups, a satire group, 176 milligram dosage, and then a placebo-controlled study. So the placebo group had a similar milligrams of non-satire. Interestingly, the first study or the first table that started talking about the hunger and satiety, the non-significant one that stuck out to me was number 2, is did you feel satiated more quickly during meals? That was a non-significant difference between the placebo and the satire groups, yet in the title it said increases satiety. So I went back to the same table. Now, number 1 says, do you feel less hungry before meals? That is statistically significant. So I went and pulled out the actual scale they used. It was a 1 to 5 Likert scale. They gave it in percentages, so I kind of had to backtrack and discover the mean differences. But what I found was that the placebo was 2.7 on the 1 to 5 scale, and the satire was 3.44. So that's a difference of 0.74 unit on a 1 to 5 strongly disagree to strongly disagree Likert scale. So we can now come to a conclusion of, does this really making a big difference on satiety and hunger or not, based on what the data is telling us. Also, when you look at myths, you got to think practically and with some common sense as well, because not all things are myth, right? We're trying to figure that out. The study did use 175, and other studies tended to be up to 180 milligrams of satire. However, if you go to the website of the company that makes these appetite suppressant lollipops, they don't give us how many milligrams of satire is in there. It would be hard pressed for me to believe that there's 175 to 180 milligrams. However, I do know how much sugar is in each one of these, and they're 9 grams a piece. Their recommendation for it is 18 total grams, or 2 lollipops per day for appetite suppression. Based on the American Heart Association guidelines for women, for example, at 25 grams of added sugar per day, that's 75 or so % of their daily intake, trying to suppress their appetite. So again, thinking common sense as we get to these recommendations. Sometimes we don't even know where the myth actually comes from. This one, does eating bananas cause belly fat? It actually came from my sister-in-law. I was talking to my brother through virtually, and she popped her head in and she was like, "Hey, do eating bananas cause belly fat?" I'm like, "No." And she jumped away. She's like, "Okay, thanks." Then she comes back in, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it doesn't." And she leaves, comes back in, "Yeah, because my coworker, she says that her cousin's trainer's boss, something like that, told her that eating bananas, that's the cause of belly fat. So will you look into it?" So I did. Um, this one, it did drive me bananas, pun intended, because I could not really figure out where it came from. It likely came from the glycemic index theory, as you see below, but maybe somebody did see a monkey eating bananas with a big belly and was like, "See, I told you, eating bananas cause belly fat." I don't know. Sometimes we don't know, but it's extremely important to get to the root origin of any potential myth that you're looking into. Then you can look at who it affects and how much. This is a very in-depth conversation that we could have, but to highlight the thing that I've dealt with the most in my career, working with behavior change, particularly in women, and related to body image and body weight control, body fat control in particular, has been weight training. I am a humongous advocate of weight training, resistance training for these outcomes, alongside all the other wonderful benefits that come along with weight training. So I do believe that weight training is awesome. But there is a major barrier that is not only evident in the research, but evident in my practice of why women don't lift weights. Now, again, thinking of beginning exercisers. Do you have any idea what that might be? You probably already know the number one reported barrier has been fear of big muscles. There's not a ton of research on this, by the way, if you're interested in this topic. This study I found from 2016 with Dr. Vogel, they did a more of a qualitative study, but if you can see some of those quotes, it's not uncommon for that fear to have them avoid lifting weights at all. And so it's a strong enough perceived barrier that if you don't handle it and you're working with a non-exercising or an inactive population, it becomes problematic. It's also problematic in some men, as well as competency and the social norms of the gym and other barriers that they might face. But when you look into who it affects, you can start seeing how these beliefs, how these attitudes, how these fallacies and myths start affecting behavior more and more strongly. Once you get through that, then you look at the actual discrepancy targeted. Now, this is a part of a theory, as you'll see in a bit, that is my main theory of self-regulation that I use for a lot of my research. But it is very traditional for ads, products, diets, exercise routines, exercise products, and so on to specifically target a discrepancy. I mentioned ads, remember old school infomercials and things like that. And so this is nothing new. You can pull old ads and we see the reduce your flesh again. Do you have to turn away from your own skin? We see it with hair. We see it with numerous things that create a discrepancy. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this in a bit. This from Fitness Pudding. Over on the right, I've added a while back a word cloud type component. And you can see these are just coming from the tags, and you see things: weight loss, exercise, calories, diet, physical activity, obesity, energy. You can start seeing kind of what the common discrepancy are and what people are searching on. I was just looking at my Google website results of this last night for fitnesspudding.com. And one of my fastest, the last month, the best, highest trending topic is massaging fat away. And this is one I've done a long time ago. And so I was curious why it was trending. Well, I believe it's because of the massage guns that are out that is having people search on Google and then getting them to Fitness Pudding. So if you follow along with me and pay attention with Fitness Pudding, I'll be posting something pretty soon on the possibility of the massage guns to actually reduce fat. So that'll be fascinating. So we have these trending topics that people are pursuing, and we got to take those on as we do. As you see, belly fat here is another one. Sometimes they come to me and they'll come to you and they seem completely off the wall. So USA Today and New York Post, they're looking at this McDonald's French fries, and actually this just came back around. I know President Trump tweeted something about it as well. And I was sent this years ago about McDonald's French fries curing baldness. And I don't know why I was sent that, but I was. And so I went to the USA Today article and looked down at the discussion. I don't know if you do that, but sometimes it's fascinating. Sometimes it's disheartening. Sometimes it's just evil. But Ron Williams said, look, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is true. I'm bald and I've eaten too many fries from Mickey D's. I am still bald. How many millions would you have to eat? Well, as you know, discussion boards, all the scientists and experts are there. And Matthew comes on and says, sadly, eating the fries will not help, though that would be preferable, clearly. The chemical used in the oil is the secret here. It will take some time before you see hair growth treatments making use of this information. Now, Ron's like, okay, great. Well, Gerard chimes in and says, Ron, maybe the trick is to rub the fries all over your head. So Ron, by now, he's like, okay, these guys are fooling with me. No, hey, Matthew, how much oil and how much time? So I had to look into this. I had to look, is there any potential evidence? Where in the world did this come from? So I did a post, do McDonald's French fries, are they a cure for baldness? The origin study was this one, spontaneous hair follicle germ formation in vitro petri dish, enabling the large-scale production of HFGs for regenerative medicine. Okay, so clearly McDonald's French fries cure baldness, right? Nope, we got to dig. This is a visual from the actual study, and they were just telling us how they did this study. They created these plates and they milled the holes in there, and they poured an epoxy resin and created a positive mold that they pulled out and then flipped over. They then put this barrier around it and poured in polydimethyl siloxane, which is a silicone, in this. And then once that dried, they pulled the silicone mold out and it was all floppy, and they flipped it over, and it had these wells, micro wells, for them to finally put in the hair follicle germ medium. So they did that and they let it grow, and then they cut it off, and then they put it on the back of a genetically mutated nude mouse, and ended up finding that, sure enough, over time, they grew hair on the back of their skin. So hopefully Ron doesn't look like this, and maybe that's something he likes, I don't know. But you notice that it was the culture medium that caused the hair growth, not the polydimethyl siloxane that was poured to create the mold, right? The mold was not used anything related to the hair growth. It was just to hold those 300 or so micro wells. And why do I bring that up? Well, I had to go to McDonald's ingredient list, and I actually searched, as you see at the top, for French fries first. And sure enough, I found that the dimethyl polysiloxane was added as an anti-foaming agent. So then I was like, what other foods have that? And I see it in crispy chicken fillet, fish fillet patty, chicken McNuggets. There's even in the hash browns. And then I started finding that it was showing up in Dr. Pepper, Diet Coke, Diet Dr. Pepper, Sprite, and so on. So as an anti-foaming agent, the silicone is added into oils. It's added in to these sodas so that the sodas transfer in trucks and things and shipped. They don't explode everywhere, or the oil that the workers are working with in the fast food joint, and this would probably be all fast food joints, by the way, are using that silicone in the oil so that it doesn't splash up as much and injure the employees. But I just didn't know, right, that this anti-foaming agent was in there. Some journalist somewhere, somehow connected that they put silicone in oil of French fries at McDonald's and other fast food joints, that silicone was used to create a mold in that study related to hair growth, hair follicle germ in mice, and then wrote an article and more articles that McDonald's French fry cure baldness. So it's pretty clever, actually, and it's pretty intense on how they did that. So we got to, as we trace things back, right? Where did it come from? What were the discrepancy? Clearly, balding is a discrepancy, and people are more willing to believe things when a discrepancy is tapped into. So this is where the physiology and the psychology of things come in. I'm very fascinated with both the physiology and the psychology, and unfortunately, I can't really spend much time on either. The fear of big muscle, clearly testosterone would be one of our first physiological markers to look at. And so in helping debunk this myth, we would look at studies like these classic studies that looked at free testosterone and total testosterone over weeks and months of weight training. As you can see, women at age 40, women at age 70 along the bottom. There's really not a clear change over time. And actually the difference between testosterone and nanomoles per liter between men and women is drastically different. You're looking at 17 or so nanomoles per liter with the men ages 40 to 70 and only 1.5 for total testosterone at the bottom. Free testosterone is still a fraction of the amount of free testosterone that men have. And you know the anatomical reasons for that. So the idea that they're going to have enough testosterone to produce the amount of growth, we can actually argue against that very clearly with physiology. It doesn't mean that they don't think they're too big perceptually, right? And so everybody has their own perception of muscle mass, their own perception of body image, their own perception of tone, which again has not been well looked at if you get interested in some research ideas. Spot losing fat is a big one. Again, if you just look at the basic anatomy and physiology of how we break down triglycerides into glycerol and free fatty acids and shuttle those to where we need to shuttle them, the idea that I'm going to do some sit-ups and that fat is just going to melt, subcutaneous fat is just going to melt into the muscle or something like that, again, is just completely incorrect. And so we can jump to the anatomy, we can jump to the physiology to give us a basis for how we're trying to teach people about total body fat loss and how to go about doing that better. Because again, people will do short spot losing fat techniques. And if it doesn't work, they're like, oh, I guess I can't lose weight. I guess I can't lose fat, right? So it affects their future behavior. And so that's clearly not the case. We look at things like the Twinkie diets and other diets, which largely gets at energy balance, right? One Twinkie, if it's 135 calories, I could get what, 20 something cups of spinach. And so it's about calories versus quality, calories in, calorie out. We can look at some of these basic physiological principles that you learn in your classes in exercise physiology and nutritional science actually become extremely handy in your application to teaching clients, patients, and other professionals about how to handle and go about these myths and fallacious thinking. The perhaps my favorite part, though, is the psychological explanation. And we spend a very large part of the semester of my class on this in theory to explain. I told you about the discrepancy earlier. This is the feedback processing model of self-regulation. If you're interested, it largely says when somebody's made aware of a standard or they have a standard and then some input shows them how far away they are from that. For example, I want to be 170 pounds. I'm trying to lose weight. I step on the scale and I'm 200 pounds. So that discrepancy is there. I have an emotional response to that information. Most likely there's some variation in motivation. There's some variation in behavior. Likely to reduce that discrepancy. I step back on the scale, still a discrepancy. This loop keeps going. Once that discrepancy is gone, this loop stops unless a new standard or goal is selected. And so we see that with weight loss research, for example. People have a standard, want to lose 10 pounds, they lose 10 pounds. They're all excited about that. And then they go have nachos and margaritas, and then they don't set a new standard and this stops, and then they gain weight back. They have some input. They try on a pair of pants. They're too tight. Now they're thinking about their weight again. They step on the scale and it kind of goes and comes. So this theory, again, feedback processing model of self-regulation is extremely beneficial for us to understand the psychological trigger, so to speak, to a lot of these potential myths. So what happened? What has just happened to this woman? Do you know? This is based on an infomercial. And her reaction is saying that something just happened. Any guesses? You're right. She could not open a pickle jar. She struggled and struggled and struggled. And this was an ad for the One Touch jar opener. If you've ever seen the infomercials, they'll like go to black and white, like they try to open and they can't, and then it goes to black and white and the music comes in. They try to get the pair of pants on, they can't quite button in. They're so sad and disappointed. That is all on purpose. That has a psychological basis to consumer behavior, and they're trying to create a massive discrepancy so that people want to, as we saw in that model, reduce that discrepancy ideally by buying their product. There's some other common things, and again, I can't go through, there's a lot. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. We see social proof a lot, which says that we find out what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. In the late 60s, there was this study where somebody stood on the sidewalk, and it was a student actually, and they looked straight up in the air. And the other researchers stood off to the side and wanted to see the percent of passerbys that actually stopped and looked up too. And as you see, what happened is you had the ones that would just keep walking, right, and just kind of look up, and then you had the people who would stop. So the size of the stimulus crowd, in other words, were the people that were on the sidewalk, the grad students who were looking up. So at one, it wasn't a lot of people looking up, but then you went to 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, or you had a group of 15 people on the sidewalk looking up. Then you had a very large, almost 90% of people who would stop and look up because they were trying to find out what's true, what's going on by looking at what other people do. There's certain condition where social proof works really, really well. One of those is uncertainty. So if we're not really sure about something, we're not sure about ourselves, we're not sure about being physically active, I'm not sure about eating healthily, I'm more likely to use others to decide how I should act. And this is why testimonials are extremely powerful for both good and bad, I guess. But if we're trying to get people to overcome these conditions, this is why we have relatedness from various theories, self-determination theory. We have subjective norm and the theory of planned behavior. And we have social support, social norms, et cetera, that allow us to tap into testimonials to give people some not only confidence, self-efficacy, but also to help overcome some of this uncertainty. Similarity is another one. When we are observing people just like us, we can gain confidence. It's also related to vicarious experience, which is a main contributor to self-efficacy, again, confidence in our abilities. And it might be the greatest insight into what constitutes correct behavior or best results for us. So classic case is the before-after pictures. And so you can imagine who might respond most to this ad. And I say ad because I could put any supplement, any diet, any exercise routine on top of this image, and I could sell it potentially because I'm tapping into a certain before-after interest of someone, perhaps a mother who's trying to lose baby weight, something like that. And so tapping into general discrepancies, and then they like, okay, well, maybe it worked for her. I could do this diet, for example, take this supplement, and I could look like that, and I could have weird guys stare at me out on the beach, and that's something that I want. I've also seen the social aspects related to elevation training mass, particularly related to altitude training. And so if you're interested in that, I've talked about that a couple of times at Fitness Pudding. We do see a lot where an influential person, a quote unquote credible source. I have several lectures that talk about what makes someone credible, what makes you credible, what makes me credible, why are celebrities credible, why are they not credible. And so that is a strong influence for people when they're trying to find social proof, as well as secrecy. And so the secrets of celebrities, only the doctors know, only science has found. We see this pop up a lot in books and things. I'm not saying these are bad. I'm just saying that these are techniques that are used for consumer behavior, for health psychology, to try to get people to act in a particular way. Controversy is a big one as well. And I can't really get into much detail, but one that I found not too long ago was this idea that asparagus may cause cancer. And I had to look into this. It was about an amino acid called asparagine, which I wasn't that familiar with. And largely cancer cells consume asparagine to help it metastasize. And so I went and found the original study, and this was it. Asparagine bioavailability governs metastasis or spread of cancer in a model of breast cancer. This was both an in vitro and an in vivo model, particularly in mice. And so I went and looked at what they did in the methodology. They took immunodeficient mice, and then they injected cancer into them, and then they divide them into 3 groups: a no asparagine group, so their diet per day had 0 gram or 0%. A low asparagine was 0.6%, and a high asparagine diet over the period of the study. And sure enough, they found that the spread of cancer was higher as they ate and consumed more asparagine. When they blocked some of the receptors that asparagine would work, there was actually no increase. So definitely asparagine is related to the spread of cancer in this animal model, no doubt. But if we look back at the idea that asparagus causes cancer, we can at least conclude from this study that mice were not fed asparagus. asparagus did not cause cancer. It was related to metastasis, right, and spread of cancer in immunodeficient mice who were given that. And that's fine. That was a great study that found that. And the picking on asparagus, probably because of the name and it's a vegetable and it's a bit controversial, right? But fruit and vegetables are generally very low. However, fish, poultry, dairy, pork, beef, eggs is higher, but clearly not necessarily as controversial, at least at this time. So maybe less clicks, less advertisers are happy, and so on. So I was curious, though, how would this translate to humans? I reached out to Dr. Michael Roberts, who you guys will have the pleasure of watching soon, and Dr. Chris Lockwood, who I think are just remarkable people, and I look to as experts, and I'm a big fan of both of them. And so I wasn't necessarily familiar with animal models. And so I reached out to them, and they let me know that it was somewhere between 3 and 5 grams per day at this 4% asparagine. And so I kind of translated this by weight of a 176-pound person. They would need to eat somewhere between 488 to 1,013 spears of medium-sized asparagus per day to reach that same level as the mice. It has nothing to do with the study, right? The study was awesome. It's just, how do we translate those results to practice? In this case, there's misattribution. HCG diet, we saw misattribution is a psychological theory where we attribute results to one thing but not another. The placebo idea would fall into this. And so as we learn, it's probably the very low calorie diet that's contributing to the weight loss, not the HCG injections. I've seen this with the blood type diet. If you're familiar, you measure your blood type, and you're supposed to eat a particular diet based on the blood type. And this is the description here and what diet type they would need to eat. And there's been some really awesome studies on this. And these two are highlighted, where they actually give people in one group their blood type diet matched to their blood type. And then in like a placebo style effect, they give other people a different blood type diet, but they don't know it. And so I'm type A, I think I'm getting the type A diet, but I'm really getting the type O or something like that. And what they end up finding is that all of them worked pretty well, because they're all fairly prudent diets. And when people were going from unhealthy diets to these healthier diets, they all improved, even when they were mismatched. So yeah, it could work, but it might not be due to the actual blood type connection, more to the idea that we are pursuing a prudent, general healthy diet. I've always thought that I want to create shoe insoles from this magical, secret, scientific NASA material that's only used for space, but somehow I got my hands on it. And you buy this, it's extremely expensive, but you buy it, you put it in your shoes, your walking shoes, and you walk 90 minutes a day, and you eat 1,500 calories a day of a healthy diet. But these shoe soles, man, they will help you lose weight. And maybe I would sell some, maybe not, right? But clearly, I would want people to attribute their results to these shoe soles, so they continue to buy those, as opposed to the other real reasons that the weight loss is occurring. This doesn't mean that all diet, supplements, and exercise routines are misattributions. It just means that you and I need to have the ability to go figure that out so that we can teach. And that's all about displaying the research content and results to people. There's direct research, and there's research that's indirect. There's numerous things that we can do that you learn in your classes related to, and sorry, I'm going to get to a screen here, related to how we handle these. One of the big issues is, how do we base our decisions, right? Do we base it on one study? Or do we base it on a bunch of studies? And so the clear recommendation for evidence-based practice is that you base your decisions on the totality of the research. Years ago, I was given a website about the 10 top diet mistakes that slow metabolism. And one of those was number 4, your water is room temperature. And German researchers, whenever that was important, found that drinking 6 cups of cold water a day, 48 ounces, can raise resting metabolism by about 50 calories per day, enough to shed 5 pounds in a year. The increase may come from the work it takes to heat the body to room temperature. Now, or back to temperature. You may already know physiologically where this is possible. Is it based on some actual science? Yeah, I mean, you're definitely going to warm back up. Is it enough to affect body temperature? I mean, we can reach out to Dr. Jones and our other experts who look at this type of thing to really put that to the test. I did go look at the research, however. There was some German researchers, and maybe this was them because they didn't cite them, but there were two studies in 03 and 07 that Boschman did find a 24 and 30% increase in resting metabolism based on that 48 ounces of cold water. If I base my decision just on those two studies from the same lab, then I come to a different conclusion than when I look at the totality of the research. Again, we have bias. We have other research questions. We know that correlation is not causation. This article years ago said that child obesity is caused by overprotective mothers. The original study is clearly associated. And even then, there was no association at ages 4 to 5, 6 to 7, or 8 to 9 years. They did find one from 10 to 11 years related to maternal protectiveness and an increase in odds of being overweight and obese. Again, the study's awesome, and they found a really cool study. It was just there was a false misrepresentation of what they actually found. Probably the most common that you will interact with is the difference between statistical and applied significance. And I'm not going to teach you your statistics class at this point, but going back to the fear of big muscle, this study by Dr. Chillibeck and that group, again, in the late 90s, awesome research. They did 20 weeks of heavyweight training. They looked at various muscle mass changes over that time, pre, mid, and post. And this is the leg mass, and this is the results that they got. It was statistically significant, meaning they were very confident that that post mean was different than the pre. But statistical significance does not tell us how much the difference was. That has to go to clinical or applied significance. And when we look at the applied significance, we see that it was 1.32 pounds, probably not enough to make your pants fit any differently. Again, using science to base our recommendations. We find differences in sample size, like if I do a study and only have 30, it's non-significant. But if I could do the exact same study with the exact same results and have 300 in it, because the sample size N is in the calculation for statistical significance, I can find significance. So we have to look at the applied and clinical significance as well. And statistical significance is extremely important. It just doesn't give us all the information that we need. How we operationalize, people and researchers who do studies, they define things differently, operationalize things differently. For example, low dose and high dose. I've seen this in several studies. One I'm thinking of now is like high and low fat diets, for example. They may give a high fat diet and a low fat diet. The low fat diet is still at the low end, but still in the recommended range by the American Heart Association. And then a high fat diet is still also in the recommended range. It's just at the higher end of that range. So technically both groups are in the recommended range. And then it comes out that there's no difference in whatever outcome they're looking at, perhaps. But the way they defined it as low fat versus high fat, that can create some confusion for people who aren't able to dig into the research like you and I can. Of course, if we compare one group to another, what is that group? People ask me all the time, is this food healthy? And one of my first responses is, well, compared to what? So always look at the comparison groups. Placebo effect, as we mentioned, perhaps one of the biggest placebo effects that I've seen is with energy bracelets, copper bracelets, and things like that related to, let's say, arthritis. They work really, really well in reducing perception and pain from arthritis, just as good as the placebo bracelets. So there's clearly a psychosomatic response going on with those, which is fine. I'm not saying that we should go tell people, hey, don't wear those, it doesn't work. If they're getting relief, they're getting relief, right? So it's just, again, being able to look into the research, understand statistical significance, applied significance, study designs, internal validity, external validity, and so on, so that you can apply it to practice. At the end of the day, and I'll end here, you finally get to a point where you can assimilate and conclude. Was that myth busted? Was it confirmed? Was it clarified? Is it plausible? I have several stamps, so to speak, that I use in fitness pudding and trying to teach these methods. Put your biases in check. Go with an open mind. You're not out to trash people. You're not out to make fun of people. You're not out to cause discord. You're both coming with grace and truth, trying to be full on both of those levels, so that you can attract people to do the right things and the healthy options, as well as build your network, even when there are differing opinions. And I hope that that helps you sort of understand how, one, not to be fooled, but then have a mind over myth. The last thing I'll say, Dustin, before you close out is I am quite interested in future moving forward toward a institute for myth research where we could actually start putting these to the test. And I think here in Texas, we have a really good opportunity because of the great labs we have, the great faculty we have, and the great students like you we have that could put these to the test. And I think that would be a fascinating option for us moving forward. So thank you guys for paying attention. I hope that was okay. And I'd love to hear any questions either now or follow up with me afterwards.
Hey, thanks, Mark. On behalf of Texas ACSM, we appreciate you. In this format, you can't see everyone's laughter and applause, but you definitely
I just assumed everybody was laughing and applauding. Yeah.
Hey, I was definitely entertained and laughing at several parts there. So we'll start out. We do have one question. So reminder, you guys, if you have questions, you can type into the Q&A. So we'll start. We got a question from Matthias that says, so would stepping on the scale every day be good psychologically for people losing weight, or is it very individual?
That's a phenomenal question. Thank you, Matthias. So yes and no and yes. So it can be quite beneficial for people to step on. The current recommendations for weight screenings and self-monitoring of weight is at least once a week. Dr. Rena Wing, if you look at her at Brown University, she really established the early research in weight self-monitoring. And a part of her weight loss research and interventions, they do weigh once, maybe twice a week, up to once a day. And what she does is she combines that with a stoplight type grid where they have a target weight range and they step on the scale often, again, once a week, once a day. And if they get above that in the yellow zone, so the range is the green, if they get above in the yellow, then they have things they do to kind of get the weight down just a little bit. If they get to the red zone and gets too much, then they have other things like getting back with their health coach and things like that, going back to the doctor. So often for people can be more beneficial to keep it kind of mentally where they need to be if they're taking the right steps. And so your question is good because some people psychologically just have difficulty handling that. And I've shown that in my research. That is where you see the individual difference. And I highly recommend if you're working with individuals with weight control and self-weighing, that you monitor, when you assess that, what is their response? Ask them, how does that make you feel when you see your weight do this or that? And then base your self-monitoring and health screen or your weight screening recommendations based on that individual and their context specific scenario.
Okay, so I've got one, and we'll see if a few more will trickle in in the next few minutes. But okay. One of the things I thought about as you're going through this is how do you deal with people reverting back to myths? So even after you've educated them on a topic, I think of a lot of like undergraduate students, maybe I think like lactate and muscle soreness, and maybe you're trying to educate those people, but you see them revert back to the myth when they can't try to explain it to someone else, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question. We do see it a lot, right? And lactate is a really good example, lactate being the bad guy and so on. You would think that educating on the Cori cycle and things like that would help kind of bust some of that. In academics, however, we're always balancing objective data with our own perspectives. And so when those two things are in conflict, it's the same thing with goal. There's a theory of goal conflict where I know this is the right thing to do. You know what I mean? I know that. I know this is the way I should believe, but then I act this way. I mean, I think that's the phenomenon of human behavior that everybody's trying to figure out, from the habit research to more of the positive psychology and things like, how do we conceptualize our brains around being just more objective? There's theories of personality and explanatory styles where people are just more prone trait personality to venture toward some of these myths as opposed to objective science. My guess is, Dustin, is that depending on the myth, that's what helps us understand why. So for example, lactate may be due to a reason where they I don't know, maybe they just feel comfortable there. Maybe they feel like there is flaws in the data and they don't feel that it's objectively sound as maybe you do, and some of their bias against that. There's confirmation bias that plays into this, where we read something or hear something and we try to twist it to confirm our beliefs as opposed to oppose it. So if they already have a bias coming into that about lactate, it takes a lot for some people to override that. And that's our job as educators, is to present it in a way to where people have the knowledge, the students have the knowledge, practitioners have the knowledge, where they can make those decisions accurately. But it's a good question.
All right, so we got another one this one's from Hero. When you are weighing the available evidence, how do you deal with publication bias? As you know, negative results are very difficult to publish and do not show up easily in journals.
Yeah, amen, Hero. One reason I have several outstanding studies that will likely never be published is because they are non-significant. They are extremely beneficial because they're non-significant, but it just makes it really difficult, especially when it's a novel theoretical approach. Luckily, we have more and more review articles, as you know, and meta-analyses that are coming out that are reporting on publication bias. And I think that is helpful. I would probably revert back when I normally teach about publication bias. It's one, teaching about what is publication bias and how do we look for that. Should we assume that or not? And if so, what are the characteristics of publication bias? I found that students that have kind of a baseline for that, that can be helpful. The other thing that I teach a lot, as we saw today, is on using the totality of the research in a way that allows us to say it wasn't just one study or two studies, this was actually the totality. I mean, you can look at funders and things like that, but just because somebody's funded by, a company doesn't mean they're evil or they're lying with those results either. The last thing that I teach is being flexible in thinking. In other words, we know that research changes over time. And so we know that's possible. Man, I've been dealing with that so much with this COVID-19 pandemic since January. As we learn more and the research changes, that's interpreted at times, and sometimes it is, but it's interpreted as people are being flippant, researchers don't know what they're talking about, and things like that. And so being flexible and know that those things can change over time. But we need more researchers looking at publication bias to help us have a more clear answer as we teach these concepts to other students.
All right, so maybe time for another question or two, and then we'll wrap up. In the chat, there's one. These are more specific to some of us out there, maybe. Have you looked into cryotherapy for spot reduction of fat loss?
We have, yes. So I have a couple of posts at fitnesspudding.com on cryotherapy, or that are included within posts. I know there's one that was popular a while back for cold air and weight loss. It tends to look more at general weight loss. The research that we've done, and I actually had a student do this as her topic last year, and she looked more at spot loss. And what she ended up finding was that, yes, it can cause some breakdown of the fat cells in spot areas that the cryotherapy is provided. However, she found the results to be fairly menial. And so again, it was another lesson of statistical versus applied significance. And it puts the decision in the person's hand. And that was her conclusion, was like, hey, if you want to spend the money and go get it done, then this is probably the results you're going to get. And it's up to you if you want to do that or not. Same thing with liposuction, those type of things. However, she did a really good job of comparing that to the results that could be found with healthy eating and physical activity. And it was night and day. And so I think that's helpful at the end of these is, yeah, you can look at the specific like cryotherapy and spot reduction, but then how does that compare to the healthy lifestyles that we're trying to get people to live?
All right, so if you got time for one more, well, then we'll conclude. Last one in the chat is, since HCG helps boost endogenous T production, is it possible that any perceived weight loss is secondary to being more anabolic? Do you think that's a question worth researching?
I think it's fascinating. So when you look at the milieu of how things occur, and this was in the process that I didn't really get time to get into, related to the physiology, because when you look mechanistically at how things work, you begin to get questions about pathways that might be contributing or not. So you first have to counter your question with the idea that look at the general data of HCG and weight loss generally. And as we've kind of found up to this point, there's not really much of a connection. Now, could you change the dosage and affect or change the makeup of the HCG so that it impacts endogenous testosterone production more? I think that's reasonable to look into. I think you look into the studies that have already been done with HCG and the production of endogenous, as apparently you have, see what that increase has been. The second thing, and we've seen this with a lot of pro-hormones over the years, colleagues of mine who have looked into that, and the little bit of familiarity that I have is that just because the testosterone is increased and floating around doesn't mean the body uses it in a way to increase muscle mass, strength, power, and et cetera. So that'd be the third level I think I would dig into, is just because it's free test, what about getting that into the places where it needs to produce in your case, the fat or weight loss that you're going after? And then finally consider the effects of that. Are they large enough relative to, again, as I said earlier, exercise and healthy eating? If you find that there's really nothing out there, and you find that that could be a reason that HCG could be improved as a mechanism for weight loss, I think it could be reasonable. I'd be curious what you would find with that. But once you do all that and lay your foundation, you should be able to answer your question there. I think it's a good one.
All right, thanks, Mark. So again, on behalf of Texas ACSM, thanks for serving as our guinea pig on the virtual lecture series, and for everyone in attendance today. Appreciate y'all being here. Next week, we've got our second speaker in the fall lecture series here, Dr. Mike Roberts from Auburn University. So same place, same time. That email went out. Is a separate registration link, but you should have that in the membership email that went out, or you guys can see it on Facebook and Instagram or social media accounts. Those links should be available. So Dr. Roberts will be talking about resistance training adaptations to different loading schemes. So with that, thanks, Mark, and we'll see y'all next week, hopefully.
See you guys.